Do you ever feel overwhelmed by your child's behavior or stuck in a cycle of meltdowns? You're not alone. Welcome to Beyond Behavior, the podcast that gets real about raising kids. I'm Ariela, a parent coach with an expertise in neurodiversity and behavior and a passion for empowering parents. We're ditching the perfect parent myth and diving deep into what actually makes kids tick. We'll explore the why behind tantrums, power struggles, and everything in between. Join me as we chat with experts, share relatable stories, and uncover practical strategies that you can actually use. So let's look beyond behavior and navigate this journey together. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Behavior. I'm so happy that you are here today. I have a really cool episode for you focusing on education and more specifically post-secondary education. Today I speak to Colleen Stevenson, who is the founder of Choose Your Uni. Colleen is a PhD candidate at OISE at the University of Toronto, where she studies Canadian universities from an institutional perspective with a focus on EDI. Previously, she worked in student affairs and taught business courses. She also works as an educational consultant and founded Choose Your Uni, through which she supports students and their families as they plan for and begin university. So if you have a student who's in high school who is thinking about preparing or applying to universities, this episode is absolutely for you. So help me welcome Colleen. Hello, Colleen. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you here today. It's been a long time coming. We've been planning this for a while. So
Yeah, thank you
welcome.
so much for having me.
Of
Very
course.
excited.
And yeah, for our audience, how did I get you here? I was just saying in your introduction that it's a really cool episode. Colleen and I know each other. We've known each other for just over a year, I would say. We have
Organic.
we have some people in common. And we kind of met each other through some networking things and some business things and really hit it off right away. And I think, we kind of recognized right away that we have a lot of commonality in the work that we do in terms of helping folks. And, Colleen helps everyone, regardless of, neurodiversity or not, kind of around post-secondary and things like that. But we really hit it off and figured out that we can really, like, a lot of our work is quite aligned. um, yeah, we kind of got to know each other that way. And, we've attended a bunch of like networking events together and, we've run in the same circles. So that's really how we know each other. But I really wanted to have you here, Colleen, because your business and what you do is so cool. And it's so different actually than what I've seen before. Your business, like I said, is called Choose Your Uni, and I want you to tell us the story behind it.
Yeah, so I actually used to work in higher education. I worked at a university for about 15 years. Academic advising, a little bit of scholarship work, admissions, all these things. I taught a couple courses, and I actually quit that job in 2020 to do my PhD in higher education. So I study higher education now. But I think what I realized in that work, working with students, was that we would get students coming into the advising office in, second year or whatever it is, trying to figure stuff out that it really would have benefited them to figure out earlier. So whether that's trying to change universities or majors or, they just trying to figure out what they want to do with their life. And so I kind of knew that there was a little bit of an education gap in between high school and university, and that students could be more prepared, not just academically, but also in terms of like decision making and figuring out what they want to do. So I started basically academic coaching, working with students while they pick a major, also working with students to like get through their courses and be successful in their courses. And yeah, so I've been doing this since 2021. So about 4 years of Choose Your Uni.
That's pretty awesome. And before I get to the rest of my questions here, just for as a mom, what grade would you say that you would start working with kids? Because my daughter is going to grade 10 in September and we're already talking post secondary, which scares the bejeebies out of me.
Yeah, I think start as early as grade 10. Mostly I start working with students in grade 11, but your grade 11 courses are also looked at when you apply to university. So you do want to check that. But yeah, I would say I usually start working with students about grade 11 to kind of make those decisions, because the grade 12 courses and grades are the ones that are going to be evaluated, right, for university. And so you have to have the right kind of courses there as well. Some of the big scholarships you have to apply for in your grade 12 year. So that's another piece to kind of think about. So yeah, I would say start thinking about it grade 10 and then kind of doing a little bit more research and getting more into it in grade 11.
Okay, amazing. So I want to know what makes you different than like other services like yours, like other, I guess, consultants or
Yeah.
university prep services.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't really consider myself university prep.
Okay.
Although I do provide like academic support, I actually do more on the scholarships and the choosing your uni side, because I think that's a place where there's a huge gap. I also work with all students. So like there are services out there that work with like the top 10% of students or whatever, right? Like the really high flyers. And that's great. And I work with really amazing, I do work with high flyers. I work with really good students, but I also work with like maybe a more average student kind of
Yes.
idea. And I think, um, that is really relevant, and then I also think the other thing that kind of differentiates me is, like, I've been immersed in the university environment pretty much since I did my undergrad. Like, I did my undergrad, a few years later, I started working at the university, did my master's, came to U of T doing my PhD, and I'm still working with students. Like, I've been in this system a long time. And I think I'm very familiar with how universities run in general, and some of the kind of unspoken expectations. And I think that piece is really
Yes.
important for students. And I think that's kind of, I would say, like my specialty is kind of like peeking behind the curtain and articulating the things that people don't always say out loud about university.
Yeah, and I mean, it's evolved, right? Like I left post-secondary 21 years ago. And it is just it's evolved and my daughter asks me questions and I don't know the answer. So I think, what you do is so important. And I also heard you say that you work with, all students. So you focus on scholarships and things like that. Does that mean that there is room for scholarships and things like that for students who may not be like super high academically? Are they based on different merits?
Yeah, oh yeah, there's lots of scholarships available that are not necessarily specifically about grade. Most of them are gonna look at your grades, honestly,
Yes. Yeah.
but some of them, they look at leadership skills, there's community involvement, there's, like, advocacy, there's all sorts of scholarships, and I would say particularly for if we're talking about neurodiversity, for students
Yes.
who have, like, a diagnosed disability, there lots of scholarships available. And there are also
Interesting.
grants. This is something that a lot of students don't necessarily know. Like when you apply for student loan, there are disability grants within that. And basically, that means you don't have to repay a portion of your student loan. It's a gift.
That's actually really good to know because, again, as my listeners and followers know, my son, who's only going to grade 6, ADHD, learning disability, and an autoimmune disorder, which I don't know if that counts. But, anyways, I know he's going to need some support just to be successful, and that's okay. And so it's really good to know that there are some options out there for him
Yeah.
because, again, I never want to make my children feel discouraged, right? If the grades aren't like in the 90s, because that's just not the reality of the kind of learner they are within our system, then I don't want them to feel like they can't do, right? Like they can't, have a post-secondary education, right? And for me, again, as a parent, my rule for my kids is you must do something post-secondary. I don't care what it looks like, but you have to learn something, whether it's university, college, trades, I don't care. You got to learn something because you need to take that step. So this is really good to know as someone who has no idea. Now, how does Choose Your Uni support neurodivergent students with those like mental health challenges and as they prepare for college or university?
Yeah. So, I mean, I work in kind of a student focused way. So, I work one on one with students. So, whatever we're doing is based on what that student needs
Okay.
and kind of talking through those challenges. So, that might be figuring out what the student's required course load is. So, like, if you're a full time student, you have to do 3 courses basically. But again, if you have a diagnosed disability, you can reduce that and like figuring out what's going to work for that student. Because students, I mean, the thing is, yeah, you should prioritize your education. Yes, you're at university. Obviously, that's academics are a priority, but we also can't ignore having a social life and, being with your family. And a lot of students work part time and do other things. And like, we can't neglect any of those areas because they're all so important. So it's just about finding what's kind of doable for a student, and what their schedule is going to look like. I think the other thing that I often talk to students about your semesters, like 12 to 14 weeks. and it goes by fast. So, like, you might have some really busy weeks that you feel like you haven't seen your friends in forever, but the reality is it's a, 3, 4 month semester. And so it's just about kind of looking at each week in which are kind of the lighter weeks so that you can be more available or like do fun things and like the self-care things then, so that when you get to one of those like midterm week when you have 3 midterms and you're studying 18 hours a day, well, I don't recommend that, but when you're getting to those really busy times, you have like built up to that and you're prepared and you can get through it and then it's done. But also, like the being realistic about it, about, whether students are going to fall behind and how do you deal
Yes.
with that? Do you do you try to catch up? Again, you're in a 12-week semester, or do you just kind of move forward as best as you can? And what are the solutions to that? So I would say working one-on-one with students. I also do a lot of referrals out for students. I work with a coaching company that works specifically with students with disabilities. It's called My
Okay.
Learning Coach.
Okay.
And they started, I think, in Alberta. But again, she very similar to me. It's another woman who worked in higher ed, and she was like, "Oh, there's
Yes.
this gap here." So they provide coaching to students with disabilities, but they also help the students get funding from either their like grants or from the universities. So students not paying for the
Right.
service with
That's
them
amazing.
usually, yeah, and they provide a really amazing coaching service. I coached with them for a little while. They work, again, one-on-one with students, and I would say that kind of work, which I can do with Choose Your Uni, but I would probably be more likely to refer out to them. But basically, I would sit with students and kind of a lot of students struggle to understand the requirements for
Yes.
assignments, so you just go through that with them and then figure out how they're going to do the assignment or
Yes.
figuring out their weekly workload, like all of these pieces. And it's like stuff that you feel like maybe you should know how to do it, but it's just much easier when you can talk it through with someone.
Well, and listen, as somebody who's got an ADHD brain, yeah, when I'm not good at looking at a piece of paper and like making sense of it. I do have to break it down. I
Yeah.
now know how to do that.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I didn't. So I think that's incredible. It's incredible that you can provide that and that, there's that other service that can provide that. I'm going to have to actually
Yeah.
connect with them now because now I want to know. But yeah, that's incredible because it's so important. And I think that's such a huge barrier to success, right? I think for a lot of our learners, especially learners who, if you have a child that can go to post-secondary, because not all kids have the capacity, but if you have a child that has the capacity, whether it's college or university, whatever that might be, having that extra coach, having that extra person by your side to just kind of break things down for you, talk out it's a really busy week. What is that going to look? Put some structure, make you feel okay about the fact that you're feeling overwhelmed and help you feel less overwhelmed. That's like essential. I absolutely love that.
Yeah. Well, and this I probably should have included this in the intro, but this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this as well. I think there are students who, I've met students who their guidance counselor was like, "Oh, you're never going to go to university," or students who, they're like, "Oh, I have ADHD, I'm not going to make it in university." And it's frustrating because I think, we've over time we've made universities more accessible, but there are still so many barriers that people don't realize. And I think, especially with so many universities here, education is pretty accessible. It would be amazing to see more people who really want to go to university know that they can do it and
Yes.
have enough supports in place that they can.
Yeah. And to be honest, I wish those supports were in place 25 years ago because before I went to college, I actually did a couple of years at university and wasn't successful. Didn't know what I know about myself then, right? Like I didn't realize that sitting in a lecture hall with 200 other people listening to my prof talk about the theory that I read last night that just didn't, stick in here wasn't going to work for me and didn't realize that it's
Yeah.
because I needed a different structure. I thrived in college, but I wish that I had access to support so that I could be successful because I had a goal. My life veered in a different direction. I'm very happy it did. Worked out for me. There was that I saw it as a waste of a couple of years, but also there was that kind of effect that it had on me as a person of like, I'm done. Like I can't do this. So speaking of barriers, I want to know, like, what barriers still exist in post-secondary systems, especially for neurodivergent learners, especially for learners who have ADHD, learning disabilities, autism, things like that?
This one's really challenging. So I think you bring up a really good point with the lectures. Universities are a very interesting space because, we do research at universities and the research is always moving forward, cutting edge, right? Their universities are doing amazing things, but in other ways, universities as institutions are still operating kind of the same way that they did hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
And so you bring up the large lecture. I also really struggled with lectures because I found it so hard to listen to someone talk for 3 hours about
Yes.
something that I didn't fully understand. I found that very challenging.
Yes.
And I mean, to be honest, that's not I think anyone who's like a teacher knows that that's not the best way to learn, but this is still what we're doing in a lot of classes, which is very strange. So I think there are some barriers in terms of like how we teach in universities that can make it really challenging because they're still doing this kind of learning style. And then you can add to this that it can be really challenging to get accommodations. I think that's a huge barrier. Even, like you can register universities all have some form of accessibility office, but in order to register and, like, get accommodations, you need a diagnosed disability, and then there's a bunch of paperwork. And so this can be problematic because it costs money to get a diagnosis.
Yes.
You're looking at, I was looking at a place in Toronto, the ADHD diagnosis or the test that they do is like
Yes.
$3,000.
Yep.
And, like, how do you especially as a student, how are you paying for this?
Yes.
And B, the paperwork, especially, like, for someone who has ADHD, all of a sudden you're like, "Okay, you need to collect paperwork from these 10 sources, and here's some forms, and you have to find this. Then you have to talk to this person and that person," and, like, that can be really challenging when A, you're already a student taking classes, and B, if you struggle with, like, paperwork and forms, that can be really hard to do. Like, it's a lot of work. And so I think those are kind of still some barriers. I also think, like, there are ultimately, the accommodations are up to professors, and I don't think this happens a lot, but a professor can just say, "No, I'm not doing any accommodations," and then, like, that's it. So,
Wow, I had no idea.
they shouldn't, they mostly won't, and I
In
think it
terms
does
of, like, the
depend
human rights piece,
on the yeah, it depends on the university, but it
do
can
the
be
universities have to follow the Educational Act? I guess not.
I'd have to check because they are I think in Ontario, they're the same ministry, so I don't know,
Interesting.
yeah,
Anyways,
specifically.
that's
I'd have to
something
check,
that maybe I'll look into too, because
yeah.
that's a
But
cool path.
they but yeah, it's interesting, or professors who don't wanna follow accommodations can also just make it really hard for students to do,
That's awful to hear.
and I think that's really challenging, and there's also there are also a lot of things that professors can just do to make it easier for everyone or, like,
Yes.
better for everyone, and some don't choose to do that. So, there are still definitely some barriers
Yeah.
uh, with that. So yeah, I would really like to see. Well, okay, I have two things.
Yes.
I don't know if you asked this, but I was thinking of this. There's two things that I would like to see in terms of barriers. I think, like, I would love to see more education for profs on how to work with
Yes.
not just different learning styles, but neurodivergent students and how to make their classes better because I think that benefits everyone. Like,
Yes.
if you're having more accommodations in the classroom, that kind of benefits everyone. Because if there's a student who doesn't have a diagnosis, they're also going to benefit from that. I think the other piece that's really challenging is the amount of like work that you and self advocacy that a student has to do if they need accommodations can be really frustrating. I would love to see, and maybe some universities are already doing this, but it would be amazing if the accessibility office could be a hub, like provide like they would work with a student on different aspects. 'Cause I know I've met students who are having trouble with their student loan stuff. But if you're an out of province student, your student loan office won't, your student financial aid office, whatever, only works with in province students because they're not familiar with other province student loans. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it doesn't make sense because you're a university and people are gonna come from out of province.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, they'll do what they can, but then if you have any issues, they're kind of like, "Oh, I don't know," and you got to sort it out. But it would be
Yeah.
nice if the accessibility office could
Support
like,
you.
if you got, like, an accessibility advisor and you
Yes.
could go to them with your accessibility challenges about not just the classroom, but also the student loan or this or that. But I think a lot of accessibility offices just don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Like, they have half a dozen accessibility advisors for X number of students. I think
Yeah.
that's really challenging. So I'm not saying, like, they're not doing a good job. I think the work they do is amazing, but, like, they're limited in terms of what they can do.
Yeah. It sounds like there needs to be more investment made by universities in not just
Yeah.
expanding the accessibility offices, but also creating knowledge and training. And I mean, that's part of the work that I do with Spectrum of Light is I do that work with corporations and organizations and parents and all that stuff. And I'm like, ooh, I would love to do that with post-secondary
Yeah.
institutions, but they need to want to spend the money. And that's the issue. And it's actually, I'm a little surprised to hear that, in 2025, when DEI is so big and neurodivergence in DEI is really becoming, more in the forefront, right? Like, we're really talking about learning disabilities and ADHD and, like, different brains a lot more in mainstream, and the fact that post-secondary hasn't really found a way to invest and to want to make.
I think in a lot of ways they have,
Okay.
but I think university environment's challenging. There's still pushback.
Yeah.
And just because you have, academic freedom allows you to teach how you want. And I know, like, currently, no, I don't want to speak about that. I don't have enough information, but I know there is a group of professors who got together and they wrote to, like, I don't know, the federal House of Commons to basically, like, saying we shouldn't be doing EDI at universities.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's right now, this is maybe not specifically accessibility, but this is
Yes.
a interesting thing with universities. There's lawsuit currently in BC. I think UBC. Anyways, there's a lawsuit about not having to do land acknowledgments. So there's, like, us
BC of all
universities
places.
universities are progressive, but there's also a contingent of folks who don't believe in DEI, right?
That's very
So
interesting.
yeah, so it's challenging, and it's not. I think one of the things that very different about a university versus a corporation is that you have this freedom
Yes.
for professors to teach what they wanna teach, how they wanna teach, and this is like a hallmark of our universities. It's important, but it's also then how do you mandate things like
Yeah, like, how do you
accessibility
regulate things a
over
little bit?
accommodations? Yeah, it's really challenging.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So those pieces are very challenging. And like I say, I don't want to like I don't think this is the majority, but, like, these are
Yes.
conversations that are still happening. So there's definitely some pushback on that. And then there's also the piece about, like, if you look at, like, traditionally in universities, it would be like, well, if you can't figure it out, you shouldn't be here kind of idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
I
yeah,
lived
which
that.
yeah, exactly, and I mean, some programs, and I don't think this exists as much now, but some programs, the first year was a weeding,
Yeah.
like, to get rid of the students who wouldn't make it
Yes.
or whatever, so I think it's a unique environment to try to bring these things in, and I think this is actually kind of one of the things that my PhD research focus on is that, like, conflict between what a university traditionally is versus, like, our idealized what it should be, and
Like,
these
versus
kinds
the
of
world we live in now,
yeah,
really,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Wow, like, really interesting. I actually did not know that there was still, and I know that it isn't the majority, but I did not know that there was still, like, that mindset of, "Sorry, no." Right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just it blows my mind, especially in 2025, but I guess that's just because, I see the world very differently and navigate it very differently, and
Yeah. You can I think if you are supportive of DEI and everything, I think you can kind of not necessarily see the other
yeah,
part and not understand it. But it's definitely there. And I'm sure that exists outside of the university environment. Well, no, I know that
for
exists
sure,
outside of the university environment. We can look at
for
some of
sure.
the stuff happening in the US. But yeah, it's challenging. So I think, like, all those pieces are different barriers that
Yeah.
need some work.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
I think one of the big challenges is that work tends to fall on neurodivergent people. So it's like, and I think this happens with a lot of kind of I don't know, marginalized groups, is like, okay, we have to do the work. And right now what that looks like is like extra paperwork, extra effort to get the accommodation to help you be successful, which is very ironic to me.
Yeah, and I mean, the advocacy work is exhausting, right? I mean, I help a lot of families do that advocacy piece, whether it's in the social services system or in the school system, like the public education system, and it's just really it's a lot of work, and even in a system that is regulated and that is trying to support neurodivergent students, with a lack of funding,
Yeah.
it just becomes really exhausting. It's just
Yeah.
exhausting, right? It's
Yeah.
mentally and emotionally exhausting for parents and students to have to just ask
Yeah.
for what they need and to be given it. So it's really disheartening. So, and I mean, speaking of accommodations, like what should students and families be thinking about or be asking in terms of accommodations when supporting when visiting or applying
Yeah.
to universities?
I found this question really hard because I kind of looked at it. I feel like I'm being really negative, but I kind of looked at it and I was like, if you're applying to a university, if you're doing a tour
Yes.
and you're like, oh, I have a registered disability, how will I go about getting accommodations? And they're like, oh, yeah, you just register with the accessibility office and then your accessibility office advisor will help you get accommodation. And like to me, that would be the answer. And like I say, I don't think this is the fault of the accessibility offices.
Yes.
But I think once you actually get to campus, it tends to be more challenging than that. It's not always that simple
Right.
because it's like what are the accommodations available and like what will they actually allow and all these things. So I think I would probably try and find a student who has been, I would say specifically in your program, who has gotten accommodations or who has dealt with the accessibility office, because I think, like I say, it can vary so much. You are working in a system that is made up of individuals who will act how they act, right? Like
Yes.
I think it's the same with K to 12 too, right?
Yes.
You can have a school that's providing the IEP and trying to be really supportive, and then, like teachers are gonna be at different levels with that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think university in some ways is the same. I think one thing that I would like all parents and students to know, your IEP doesn't like carry over. Like if you have the plan in high school,
Yes.
it won't automatically carry over to the university. You have to re-register. You're going to have to get everything set up, which can be a little bit frustrating. And you
Yes.
might not be getting the same accommodations that you were in high school.
Right. So just like your IEP doesn't carry over from elementary to high school, it's got to kind of be rejigged because the supports are different. That makes sense. But I really actually like your advice of find a student in your program who has been through it, because then, they can mentor you or like steer you, guide you, help you navigate a little bit. And also like I think it creates a good connection, right? But that's really great advice because you're right. You don't want to kind of wait and then kind of, it'll be trial and error anyways, but at least if you have somebody who's like, listen, here's some pointers. Here's what I have to go through. Here's what I would do to make it an easier process. Like that's gold.
Yeah.
That's really great
Yeah.
advice.
And there's like usually a student run group on campus. There's probably a student club. University of Toronto has Students for Barrier Free Access, which is it's a nonprofit on campus, and then they also have the student clubs. And there's also in Ontario, there's a group called Needs, which is I believe a like provincial higher ed group for
Oh,
students.
excuse me. Sorry.
And they have a conference each year, but like these are places where students with disabilities can meet other students, and then some of the accessibility offices will provide that as well. So they have like an opportunity for students to connect.
That's good.
Some of them, so it's really going to depend. But yeah, I would say seek out the other students so you kind of know what you're getting into, because I think you'll have a better understanding, from an actual student experience. Because like I say, I think the accessibility office is gonna be like, "Yeah, no problem, fill out the paperwork, get the accommodation," but it ends up always being more complicated than that, or maybe not always, but
Yeah. And it sounds like, be ready to, again, if I was a parent, speaking to you and listening to this advice, I would probably, look for somebody in the vicinity of that university that my child can, maybe like get tutoring from, or like outside of university services within the town they're in, just to help them like feel supported through the process for sure. Or you. Yeah.
Yeah, or like my learning coach or whoever it
Yes,
is. I
exactly.
also I wanted to add also, universities do provide, like, learning resources
Yeah.
for all
Okay.
students. Your university is gonna have, like, a writing center and a learning center, and they'll do, like, workshops on how to write a university paper and how to study better, and that's usually open to all students, and I think a lot of campuses, those are really underutilized
Yes.
resources. And I think a lot of students only go there once their prof is like, your writing's not so great. Can you go to the writing center? But like you can just go to these and they work with all students and they will have, I would say, sufficient training or like experience working with neurodivergent students
That's awesome.
that they'll be able to provide some support. So I would also say like check out the other the resources that are for all students too and make sure you're like leveraging those because those do exist. I think a lot of students just don't go to them.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I didn't know that, and that's yeah, that's really cool. So I wanna know how, as a founder and educator and, you're obviously into higher learning because you've done all this education for yourself. How have your own values shaped the work that you do with Choose Your Uni?
Yeah, I mean, I really tried to take a student-centered approach. I think, like I said, we were talking about DEI. I think fundamentally that is one of the reasons I started doing this is because there are people missing out on the university opportunity when they don't have to. And I mean, I also like I focus on university. Like I don't do a lot of work with like colleges or trades or anything like that. I focus specifically on university. But that doesn't mean that, like, I think everybody has to go to university or, like, I think university is the best thing ever. That is not true. I happen to be very familiar with how universities work, and I wanted to share
Yes.
that information. But I think, yeah, I think it's the value of, like, making education more accessible and having more students be able to access it, and all these pieces. I think that's super important. And also reducing some of the, like, disadvantages, like, there's, research about, like, first generation students, so if you are the first one in your family who went to university, you're gonna be less familiar with the environment because your parents can't give you any advice,
Yes.
and I think too in a country like Canada where a lot of people immigrate, your
Yes.
parents I work with tons of students and they're like, "Oh, my parents wanna help me, but they went to university in Poland, and so it was
Yes.
very different." And
Yes.
they're not familiar with the Canadian system. So I work with a lot of families like that, and then, so I can be like, "Okay, this is how the Canadian system works," because it can be quite different. So I think, yeah, I think just reducing barriers and making it more accessible so that more people who want to go can and can be successful and not
Yeah.
having, and I think too, also like university is not about like the smartest students because you can be smart as anything, but if you don't know how to navigate that system, if you don't
Yes.
understand the expectations, if you don't know how to study properly or whatever, you're not going to be successful. And that doesn't mean that a student's not smart. Like it does just means that maybe they haven't learned a skill that we expected them to know or figure out and maybe they didn't.
Well, and that's it exactly, right? Like, just again, going back 25 years, had I had the support or had I had the coaching or whatever that I needed, I could have been very successful, right? Like, and back then I thought it was my intelligence.
Exactly.
Knowing what I know now, no, I'm a very intelligent human being. I just learn differently. And again, neurodivergence, your brain processing or experiencing the world differently does not equate to intelligence
Yeah,
by any
exactly.
means, right?
Exactly.
So I love that as your mission because it's so important to just support folks in, navigating the world in a way that's going to help them be successful, whatever
Yeah.
that means to them, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So,
Yeah.
sorry. What is one thing that you wish every student knew before they started their post-secondary journey?
Okay, so I like to say, and this is not the best quote, but I like to say it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal.
Okay.
Like students are like, "Oh my god, I'm 18. I got to decide the rest of my life because I'm going to pick my university and my major." And like sometimes that's true. You want to go to med school, you're going to be and you want to go in a timely manner because you're going to be in school for
Yes.
a long time. Yeah, you are going to be on a very specific path.
Yes.
But I think I usually it's also like it's only the first step of your career. Like I look at even for myself, I didn't start out wanting to do a PhD or anything. That was something that came up later, like after I did my master's and like through my career. And I think that that happens to a lot of people. Like we have this meandering in our careers. There's a paper published in one of the student affairs journals, I think last year, and it was these two authors and they compared career journeys to like student career journeys to like Tolkien, like Hobbit adventures.
Interesting.
Because they're like, you're going to start your career and you're going to think you're going to do one thing, but then there's a signpost telling you to go this way. So you're going to go this way. And then you see another signpost. So I think it's about seeing those signposts and being able to follow them to find what your career path is going to be. Especially now when like we're seeing a lot less of the like, I did this degree and then I got this job. That's
Yes. Yeah.
very challenging. And so, yeah, you're making a decision about your degree that will impact the things you do in the future, but it's also not the be all end all. There's
Yes.
also like work experience and all these other things that kind of go into your career. And for a lot of things, you could always go back to school later, right? Like it's not your career is not like determined by these first like 4 years or whatever when you're this young. There's lots of other things that will happen. So yeah, big decision, but also like you're going to be fine.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. Take a bit of that pressure and stress off because you're
Yeah.
right. Like you are going to be fine. You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to thank you because this has been really enlightening,
Yeah.
really eye opening. Like I said, my daughter's going to grade 10. We will be contacting you because she's already asking me questions. And I'm like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, reach out. Happy to help.
Yeah, no, we'll contact you because she does have some legitimate questions about, like, she kind of has a vision of what she wants to do, but she wants to know. No, she has questions, and I love that she's asking. I don't have the answer, so we will be contacting you, and I will include this in the comments for the show notes. But tell everybody how they can find you, whether it's website, socials, whatever.
Yeah. So the website's just chooseyouruni.ca. Nice and easy. I'm most active on Instagram where I'm chooseyouruni_ca. And my email is just Colleen@chooseyouruni.ca. So easy to get a hold of.
Amazing, thank you. So for any of you that have students that are in high school thinking about post secondary, want to know what your options are, want to know about scholarships, grants, and all those things, neurodivergent or not, reach out to Colleen. She really is amazing. I can attest to it on a first person personal level. She really does work hard and really is passionate about what she does, which I think is beautiful. And if this at all resonated with you, please do share it with a friend. Please like and follow, subscribe, and go check out Colleen at chooseyouruni.ca and on Instagram because she really does share some really, really great insights. So do go follow her, and we will catch you guys the next time. Colleen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Behavior. I hope you found it helpful and learned something along the way. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to share this episode with a friend who might benefit from it. Remember, parenting is a journey and we're all on it together.